Hello and welcome to FantasticBirds.us. I'm Eric Scripsack, your host, and this is an episode of your Digital Darkroom. I was out taking pictures earlier today and I happened to come across a family of Mississippi kites. Actually, several families to be exact, and this is one of the photos I kept. Most of the kite photos I threw away because the wings were really beaten up badly. I suspect this bird might have fledged this year because it has pristine feathers, and every other kite I saw had quite a few missing feathers and they were just really tore up. Now this is a very nice exposure. We can see good exposure in the tail and the wing feathers here. We can see the detail in the eye and the beak. But we do have a sky that was very hazy, and we do see some level of details being lost in the feather section. I wanted to demonstrate some principles of photo editing. The first thing I'm going to do, I could come here to the exposure slider and I could move the exposure down just a little bit. That looks a little more correct. Now keep an eye on this area in the wings. I have two sliders here, whites and highlights. I'm going to pull the white slider down and it will bring in a lot of the detail in those feathers. Now note the head got a lot darker, so you need to be a little bit careful about how much you use that, but we also have the highlight slider and we can bring that down just a little bit as well to start catching some of the detail in those feathers. Now I hear a lot of photographers talk about blown highlights constantly. You really don't have blown highlights unless you're shooting JPEG. I'm shooting RAW, and when I imported this, I told Lightroom to convert it to an Adobe digital negative. I'm pretty happy with the exposure on this bird right now. I could play around with the black slider a little bit. You gotta be careful with this because you could change the coloring on the bird very dramatically. I don't actually want to modify it and make it look in any way unusual. All I wanted to do primarily was pull in the details from the wings. I'm going to right mouse click on this and go edit in Photoshop. Now I have the photo open in Photoshop. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And we can see our bird. Now one of the first problems you have here is where does the bird's head end and where does the sky begin? Many people might use the magic wand tool, and if you start doing that, you're going to have problems. It'll start selecting portions of the bird or not. We could play with our tolerance here, perhaps raise it to 20, start selecting more things, but you notice here we've got the wings selected, we've got part of the head selected. I could use the lasso tool to modify the selection. Or I could have came up to select color range, and I could have selected a color range here. I suspect some of those wings are still being captured. Again, it's a difficult situation, but there's an easy fix. I'm going to go to Select, All. Now I'm going to hit Command Option J on a Mac, Control Option J on a PC, and I have everything selected right now. I'm just making a second copy of this image, and I'm going to click OK. Now I have the same image as layer 1, same image as background. I wanted to maintain a good copy of this image, so I'm going to modify the layer 1 image. And I'm going to do some really nasty things to it. I'm going to select Image, Adjustments. I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation, and I'm going to kick saturation up. Now this is patently absurd, but note, there's no question now where the bird's head ends and where the sky begins. So I'm going to select color range, and I will select this, and I will click OK. Now what I have is a perfect selection of the sky. Now I may still have, I'm going to just zoom in here, I do have just a few pixels being selected right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the mask tool. Now this is select a rectangle, add to a selection, subtract from a selection. So I want to subtract from a selection. I'm going to click here, 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 make a little polygon so that that's no longer part of the selection, and I'm going to add to the selection, clicking, dragging here, and we can just make that selection. And I see a little bit of the wing feather here. I could certainly go in and grab that out of here. So you can see it's not perfect, but it got a lot more than would have been possible. If I had not kicked up that saturation, we would have a lot more difficult of a time figuring out where the bird stopped and where the sky began. Now I currently have the top layer selected. I'm going to select the bottom layer, and I'm going to hit Command Option J on a Mac or Control Option J on a PC, and I'm going to make a new layer. Now because I have only the sky selected, I'm going to hide this layer, and I'm going to hide this layer. I have only the sky selected, so this layer is nothing but sky. And if we needed to, we could certainly click on that and rename it sky so we didn't get confused. Now I no longer need this top layer. I'm just going to go ahead and select this layer. I'm going to lock the blank pixels, and I'm going to use the magic wand tool just to get the blank pixels. Kick up the tolerance to 30. I now have the blank pixels selected. What I often do is sharpen the bird. Now, because the sky is nothing but sky, I can sharpen the bird on the background layer fine. I could also, let me just hide this top layer, I can also select this bottom layer. Now I have a little bit of the wing that's not selected here. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just demonstrating some principles here. I have the background layer selected. I'm going to hit Control-Alt-J, and now I have only, now I have only the bird in this layer. I have the bottom layer hidden. Notice the trees are also part of the bottom layer. So if I wanted to sharpen only the bird, I can safely sharpen layer 2, and it won't affect any of the other layers. Now about the sky. Well, first of all, let's get rid of the absurd blue sky. Now that is a very lovely shade of blue. Here's the difficulty with sky. Let me just zoom in here. I want to go to tail feathers. I don't want the sky that blue because I don't want a highlight around the tail feathers. If I try to make the sky that blue, I will have a nice outline of these tail feathers on the bird. That's not what I want. So I'm going to go to Image. I have the sky layer selected. I'm going to go to Adjustments, and we'll go back to Hue and Saturation. I'm going to kick up the saturation a little bit, and let's just see what happens. And I can also select Colorize if I choose to. And if I colorize, I can play with that a little bit here. Now you can see just a little bit of white outline here where that was previously there. I don't want it quite adjusted to the point where that outline becomes critically apparent. If I take this all the way up, you can start to see that there were a few pixels in the tail. Now there are ways of getting around that. All I wanted to do was get a slightly bluer sky, and I think I have achieved that, so I'm going to now click OK, and let's zoom in out on our bird. Now let's sharpen this bird a little bit. We'll go to Filter, Sharpen. Note I have the layer 2, it's only the bird. I can go Smart Sharpen, and I can click OK. This will control the amount of smart sharpening. I don't want to overdo the sharpening. I just want the bird just a little bit sharper. Okay. Now I'm just going to demonstrate one technique that I would not recommend for this particular situation, but it can be helpful sometimes in your photo editing. I've zoomed out so that I can see the entire photo. I've come back into Lightroom, and I'm going to kick the exposure way down to the point where I get all the detail in these white feathers. I'm going to right mouse click, go Edit in, Adobe Photoshop. Now in Adobe Photoshop, I have a new image open. I'm just going to drag this down, and I'm going to drag this image on top of the other image. Okay, and now I'm going to place it. Actually, I'm going to hit Control Z. I didn't mean to do that. Layer 3 has the updated image. I'll just drag that layer to the top. And I just need to basically square this image up so that it's exactly over top of the other image. It's not off to the side like this, it's not down like this, it's even on all edges. Okay, that's not even. Even on all edges. Now I can add a mask layer here. And I'm going to zoom back into my image. A mask layer allows me to hide or show pixels. I'm going to grab a paintbrush, and I'm going to grab the paint can, and black is currently selected. Black is hide. I'm going to paint the entire top layer with a black mask. And now I'm going to select white as my color, and white is a show. I could paint these in with a white show. Now you got to be very careful, and you've got to use a fairly fine brush. I'd probably want to take this brush down just to maybe a little bit smaller, and select black again, and just kind of hide and just try to bring in a little bit of the detail there that was lost. And I can certainly do that up here. But again, I added a mask layer, and you paint with black to hide, you paint with white to show in your mask layer. I probably would not choose to do this with the image. I am very careful not to modify any bird species in any way that's going to actually change the overall coloring of the bird, because a lot of people rely on those photographs. I'm simply demonstrating a technique that you could use. I'm going to actually get rid of this entire layer because I liked the layer underneath it. The white is actually that striking when you see the bird with the naked eye. I'm going to zoom out here, and we can get rid of this completely. Another thing I might do before I save this image is I might just, if I wanted to save this with all of the adjustments, in case I wanted to do anything to it later, I could grab the crop tool. Holding the Shift key down allows me to move the crop tool around on the screen, and I can place it where I want it to be, image, crop, and I could save my Photoshop image. That concludes this particular episode of your Digital Darkroom. Thank you for taking the time to view this video.